Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I'm your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team. My hope is to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. Supporting students is a demanding role, no matter where you sit in education, and it requires a deep well of mental, emotional, relational, and even physical energy. Educator burnout is a harsh reality many of us have faced in our careers or are currently facing. And today we're speaking with author Katrina Huels about her book, Transformational Tools for Special Educators, designed to support educators, particularly those in special education and those working with high-need students, to help support them in their work. But we're going to actually just talk about how some of these tools can apply to all educators today. So welcome to the podcast, Katrina.
Thank you so much, Larissa. I'm excited to be here.
Well, first of all, I would love for you to talk a little bit about what inspired you to write this kind of book, and maybe give us the subtitle, because I know you mentioned that there's a subtitle to this, and then how you're hoping that this can address those needs that educators have.
Absolutely. Well, the subtitle, in a way, says it all. It is How to Beat Burnout and Become the Best at What You Do. And the reason I was inspired to write this book, I'm a former special educator. I ran the gamut from classroom teacher all the way through executive leadership, about 23 years of experience there. And what I realized was that I kept seeing amazingly talented people either leave the field or lose their passion for the work they were doing. And I started to get curious about that. There's so many reasons I could think of why that would be the case. But once I dug a little deeper, there was no doubt that burnout contributed heavily. And when I say contributed, I mean to things like high teacher turnover, a lot of absenteeism, people just not being connected to their purpose anymore. And these were very talented educators as a whole. They just couldn't sustain themselves because we've really never given them the tools to sustain themselves. And that's when I started to question, how do we actually address burnout in a meaningful way? And what I found was pretty amazing, and that is that there are a few schools out there who are using emotional intelligence development as a core skill or professional competency, rather than viewing it as a self-help or well-being type of modality. And that when they do that, these schools are seeing higher job satisfaction, therefore less turnover. They're seeing productive collaboration, I should say. They're seeing a school culture that is supportive, and that includes responsive leadership. Meaningful connections are being made. It is amazing. All the things that we worry about and struggle with are actually improved by basically just giving teachers the skills that we really want to teach to students. Often in special education, we talk about social emotional learning, but we really don't provide that kind of skill set to the people who are supporting the students, if that makes sense. So that is really, and my background was originally psychology before I became an educator. So I kind of went back to my roots, and I started looking into emotional intelligence again after many, many years. And I found that there are some amazing programs out there, but we're just not equipping our teaching staff and our teacher leaders to move forward with the skills they need to deal with the mounting paperwork, the overwhelming demands, the large classroom sizes. We can't control those kinds of things, but what we can control is our response to those things. And that reminded me of something I listened to. I think you had an episode where you were talking about reacting versus responding, and it pretty much falls right in line with that. What we want to teach people to do is to stay balanced, stay composed, and then intentionally respond. And that's what this kind of work, when you develop it as a core skill, that becomes your default, even in stressful situations.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to comment on. Is that the one, seeing really highly talented educators burn out. And I think that there is that trend of those who are doing the job really well and have a lot of those skills as they go into the work because they want to do a good job.
Yes.
I think there's that piece. Like I can think back into years of myself as an educator that I struggled because I knew I wanted to do a really good job, but I knew
Yeah.
that there's no way I could meet that high expectation I had of myself. And in so many ways, I had to lower the expectation to survive, to keep going, to not quit. And I think that's that piece where we don't want to have to lower we still want to really do really well. And so really thinking through, what can we help educators equip? And I also want to talk about, you mentioned there are things that we can't control. I
Yes.
think that there is that part of, especially I think if you speak to school leaders, there are things in the district that they don't have control over. I
Right.
hope that the
Right.
district leaders on the podcast understand that there are some system level things that they could control and do, but when your budget's tight and you don't have as many teachers to fill the spots, you
Yes.
have higher
Yes.
class sizes, there's things that are just outside of your
Yeah,
control.
when there's state mandates and district mandates, school principals really just have to, I mean, they don't really have a lot of choice either. And many of them, I've seen many school leaders incredibly frustrated because they know their staff can't take one more thing. They know that. But they have to, how do I say this? They can't express the frustration to the staff. They have to toe the party line because they're a leader. And then they have to give the bad news. And really, many leaders don't want to do this. So it's even above and beyond their control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the piece where really reflecting on what are the ways that we can support teachers where they're at. I mean, just as what we would look at students, right? Like there's so many things we can't control about a student's life. And so it's like thinking about what are the things that we can provide to them. And in the same way, leaders can think about what are the things that they can do for their teachers. And I just love that you kind of pointed out some of those things that, and I also want to mention sort of when we talk about emotional intelligence, I think that's often seen as this extra thing that a person has it or does, because we're talking about adults here, right? We're talking about professionals, and we're either thinking that's a personal thing, that's something they either have that or they don't.
Like a character trait, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like a character trait or a personality trait. And I do think there's that piece of when we're looking to, like, we work with human beings, like we still have to like kind of address some of those skills as not just an extra thing, but as a major part of what they do every day.
Right, right. You are absolutely right, Larissa. We do often think that, because there's different levels and different domains of emotional intelligence development. So some of those fall into external skills like empathy or social skills. And especially with those external skills, individuals think that you're either, you're born empathetic or you develop empathy or you just aren't that way. But the truth of the matter is, they discovered long ago that emotional intelligence can be developed in anybody at any time. If you have a mind to develop the skill, you can absolutely do that. And that's because, and I do have a chapter in my book about neuroplasticity, but that kind of talks about why that is. You can change how you react to stress, how you react to overwhelm. You can interrupt the patterns that are there now and replace them with ones that are more beneficial to you and the students and the people that you're serving as an educator. That's what's always been amazing to me about the human mind, is that you're not really fixed, but what happens is your responses almost become habitual. When you're faced with high stress day after day after day, and it's, everything is getting bigger and everything is getting more complex. I mean, over my 20 years, I saw a huge difference in the complexity of students. I mean, everything's more complex, more demanding. And what happens is that if you don't have a way, or if you don't have the skill to sort of mitigate that stress, then your immediate response as soon as you're in a stressful situation is that your heart rate increases, your blood pressure rises, and you may react. You may start reacting. And one of those reactions could be, I need a mental health day. I need to stay home. I need a break. Or, it could be that maybe you're just a little short-tempered with people around you, and that just sort of increases the stress. There's justifiable reasons why a person would feel stressed, but this is a way of actually choosing how you're going to cope with the stress. And what you said a few minutes ago about lowering the standard, that breaks my heart too, because I've seen that happen so many times where a person feels like, I've just got to do the best I can and just let it go and keep moving. Or they'll just detach. They'll detach from caring as much, because they can't, if that makes sense. And that is actually a symptom of burnout, that kind of detachment. That's one of the precursors, and sometimes it's embedded within that feeling of being burned out. Because when you lose that connection, when you lose that passion, that sense of caring that most likely brought all of us into the field, well, now you're kind of questioning what's the point, right? And then we're looking at maybe a different pathway to depression or other things too. So this is really important work we're doing.
Yeah. Well, and you touched a little bit on this, but your book emphasizes that emotional intelligence and neurology. How do you think that these concepts can help educators build resilience and maintain balance in that high stress environment? Because you talked about that neuroplasticity. Was there more?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's more in your book, but maybe speak a little bit to that.
So these are skills that basically interrupt your current patterns, interrupt your current responses to stress. And I don't just mean how you respond verbally, or I'm talking about your nervous system, your physiological responses, because many of us, when we're overwhelmed, it's more natural for us to go into fight or flight mode than it is for us to stay calm and composed. And this is one of the things that people used to comment. We worked with students who had severe behavior disorders. And so for some reason, my default over time, as soon as there would be an outburst, I would immediately center, stay calm, and speak in a very calm tone to the student. And people used to say, how do you do that? Because the first reaction is, oh, somebody's going to get hurt, or, oh my goodness, what do I do? I need to get the behavior plan out. I need to, it's very scary sometimes, because you don't know what to do and you want to help the student, And when your own nervous system responds in that way, it's hard to help. It's hard to know what to do because, as you probably know, your cognitive brain, your thinking brain is bypassed at that point. So you're just really having responses. Like I say, heart rate increases, cortisol increases, everything's on high alert. And so it's really hard to think through anything at that point, because that's the way we're made. We're trying to survive at that point, even though it's not what did they used to say? And it's not really a saber-toothed tiger, but your body's reacting as though it is. It's the same kind of thing. So I think my default became that because I already had, being that I had a background in psychology, I was already utilizing a lot of these skills. And it just made all the difference. I mean, my default eventually became calm, composed, and then how am I going to proceed? Allowing me to give a little bit of space so I could choose my next response,
Yeah.
So that's really what these tools can do. They can help you, put you in a position where you feel pretty much balanced most of the time. I mean, it's not to say you're never going to get thrown off or you're never going to have a bad day, but instead of your defaults becoming things that are not helpful for you, they actually become things that you grow from, and keep you moving forward.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think about how many years it took for me as a young teacher. I think the more knowledge I had and the more experience I had with students, it did become easier to take a breath and respond in an even tone to outbursts or, what have you. But it took a lot of practice, because when you don't have the reflex knowledge but of a student, it's hard to know, what am I going to say that's going to be helpful to make this situation better.
Right.
Or even, I think too, like there were years where I was more stressed and my reactions were more explosive, or I could tell, like there were just times where it was harder to remain calm because I can attribute it to like my nervous system. And I even think there were years, as I was an instructional coach for years too, like there was just times where reacting to the adults in situations as a leader was really hard because
my goodness,
of stress and and I was like, you're adults, like you should figure this out, or coaching adults to help in some of those reactions, learning how to be that non-anxious presence that people needed. As you're talking, I'm just thinking about how like easy it is as when I didn't have that knowledge, or even that as a younger person, just own my own and emotional intelligence.
That's very true. But I think there's also a large group of people, because educators are pretty tough, and a lot of times they tend to just put their head down and keep going, if that makes sense. And so some of these tools are really to stay very self-aware. You want to make sure you're aware of what you're actually feeling, because at some point it will start to manifest for you unless you really are in tune with what's going on emotionally for you. Because so many teachers just have to get it done, get it done, get it done, and they never really are aware of how much is going on internally from an emotional standpoint until they either get sick or finally get frustrated enough to say something about it, or sometimes, as I said, sometimes leave the field entirely because they've just had enough,
Well, and I think you're right that there are, well, and I could say that probably I'm a little more in tune with my emotions. That's just something about myself, but I think that there are others that could probably say that they aren't as aware of that. And so they come into work and they do the work and they
do what they have to do. Yeah, get it done.
But don't touch that emotional part, whether, for some reason or other.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit specifically. You can kind of touch on a few strategies, maybe give people a sneak peek of what this looks like.
Okay.
In your book.
Okay. In the book, there are 22 different tools and they span the 5 domains of emotional intelligence. So it really depends on what, as you've been pointing out, throughout our chat, people are very different. Some people are more natural at self-awareness. Some people are more natural at empathy. So you have to kind of choose where you feel like you need development. And that's very important because if you're already pretty strong in certain areas, then you probably want to focus on those where you don't feel as strong. So the 5 domains are self-awareness, self-regulation, internal motivation, which is a big one. And then those are your internal competencies, right? And once you have a good foundation there, then you can move into empathy and social skills. Because to have empathy or social skills, you really do need to have a degree of self-regulation, right? You can't be dealing with overwhelming stress and fatigue and all the things that go with that and then try to show empathy or try to use appropriate social skills. Really hard to do. So you want to develop those internal competencies first. So to give an example, it's kind of hard because I don't know what people need. You know what I mean? But I can talk a little bit about self-awareness and self-regulation because those are the two that most people work on in the beginning. So for self-awareness, let me just ask you a question. Have you ever had a very intense situation or a very stressful circumstance, and then you reacted in a very intense way, and then afterward you thought, where did that come from?
Yes.
I don't know. Okay.
That's not... I mean...
You didn't have to think about that at all. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I've had a few of those myself, yes.
As an individual that was a teacher, I can... top of my head think of those.
You remember it? Oh my God.
Personally, I would just was thinking about situations in my own home.
So that is self-awareness. The whole point of developing self-awareness by using these tools is to make that a lot less common. It actually makes you more aware because what's happened when you just react without thinking is you're not really aware of what's going on. I was kind of talking about that a little bit when I said people put their head down and keep going. And then all of a sudden, boom, right? And you don't even know where it came from because it's your emotions driving, right? You're not thinking, you're not. And then later, I can only speak for myself, but I'm usually feel so bad. I mean, afterward, I'm thinking, oh, I can't believe I said that. What was I? Where did it even come from? Oh my gosh. And, then I feel terrible. So self-awareness, there are lots of tools for that, but one that's really, 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 really easy is to stay in touch with what is going on inside of you. And that's something you can do through a tool called affect labeling, which basically, a lot of teachers have heard of this. It's throughout your day, you're basically analyzing how you're feeling in a very honest, transparent way. So you're saying, yeah, right now I feel pretty good. But now you want to describe what good means, right? So maybe good means content. Maybe good means happy. Or maybe good means thoughtful. You want to be as specific as possible because that engages your cognition. It makes you start thinking, right? And it moves you away from stress. And it makes you very, very aware of what it is you're feeling in a given moment. And that's something you can do throughout the school day so that nothing's really sneaking up on you at that point because you're quite aware of where you are. And that's a really important tool. I mean, I used to do it definitely midday because the mornings were usually very intense. So around midday, I'd take a moment and I'd think about, okay, what is it I'm feeling right now? And it would just take me less than 5 minutes to really think about it. And I might try to pare it down to the most specific emotion I could. And here's the important part. You want to think about what caused that? What caused this feeling? Because now you're starting to learn what your triggers are. And once you learn what your triggers are, now when you hear or see or feel a trigger, you know what that is. It doesn't just catch you unawares. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm not
I
sure if
mean,
I'm expressing this as clearly as I
no,
would
no,
like to,
no. I
but
think this makes a ton of sense because when I was just thinking it's having a check-in with yourself of just
yes,
going, okay, I'm feeling frustrated. Why am I feeling frustrated? Or
that's right.
even before that, you're going, I feel anxious or angry.
Yes,
And
yes.
you can say, I feel frustrated. Why do I feel frustrated? Well,
Hmm.
this and this happened and it didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to.
Right, right.
I think even just that labeling it is a great place to start.
Yep, yep. That's affect labeling, and there's lots of really cool ways to do it. I will say, and this is one of my favorite tools, and I have no just know I have no investment in this tool because they don't even know I exist. But Yale University, the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, their program is being used in some schools, and that's where a lot of this research is coming from. Is as out of Yale for emotional intelligence. So they have an app called How We Feel. And How We Feel is an affect labeling app. And you can download it on your phone. What I love about it is there's no subscription needed. You don't get a bunch of pop-ups to subscribe. It's absolutely free. And the cool thing is you can check in. You just sort of schedule a check-in and it gives you 4 large categories. Click on the category and then it defaults into subcategories so you can get real specific, right, about how you're feeling. And then I think you can keep going. It'll give you like tools. It'll give you, I mean, it's a really cool app. Like I said, I have no affiliation with it,
I'm
but I
going to link
use
that in the
it.
show notes.
Yeah. And it's a really awesome way. They're huge advocates for what I'm trying to do. And the schools that they've worked with that's where a lot of the data through Cassell, through Yale, this stuff actually works, and that's the important thing. People think of it as sort of a self-help fluff, but this is science-based. And when you start developing that skill on a consistent basis, you are very aware of what's going on. Most importantly, you're aware of your triggers. Because a lot of times we go through life unaware of that until we really start examining it in this way.
Yeah. I think that it's so important to talk about this with educators, especially because, and I can think of this as like when you're working with students, there may be things happening with students that become a trigger for you, whether
Yes,
it's something you are
absolutely.
dealing with, whether it's
Yes.
a situation that's happened with them, right? Or
Mm,
part of that student's story.
yes.
I worked in a school that I think there's a lot of us educators that had some secondary trauma because of what we understood about our students.
Yeah,
And and I think that part of recognizing how that impacts us as educators is really important because if you don't address it, then it just sits there below the surface and can come
absolutely.
out in ways where you end up kind of exploding and you're like, I don't know what happened, you
Yeah.
know?
And sometimes it's not even an explosion, it's just a sharp comment. And again, you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's the whole point of self awareness is to really get a handle on yourself throughout the day. And then I think the next tool I'd probably recommend to go along with that is a self-regulation tool. And that, of course, is breathwork. Breathwork is one of the most research-based self-regulation tools out there. I give a bunch of different ones, different techniques and different things you can use for breath work. There's just been so much research, it's undeniable that as soon as you start engaging, your cortisol levels decrease, everything kind of returns to normal. So when you're using the two together, and in breath work, honestly, any time of the day, you can start your day with belly breathing. I mean, it takes like 5 minutes, Start your day with belly breathing. If you're checking in with affect labeling, check in around noon with affect, how I feel, and then just do some box breathing, or do some belly breathing. You can combine those two together at certain times throughout your day. And just those two alone, you'll start making a difference. Here's the key though, and this is very important. I forgot to mention this the last time I had a conversation. This is really important though. You have to do it consistently. If you're trying to use neuroplasticity and change your patterns and your habits in your brain, then you have to do it consistently over time for it to become a default. And that's the important part. You can't use it every now and then. It will help you in the moment. But if what you're going for is what, you mentioned resilience and long-term change, then you really have to start kind of commit to it, at least for 3 or 4 weeks, and then step back and say, okay, I've tried this practice for 3 or 4 weeks. Hasn't made a difference. And if it has, keep going, add some more tools. That's kind of what we normally suggest.
So I'm curious about even just how I know you work with, whether it be groups of teachers or with schools. Where do you find that the role of professional development communities or even just professional development can help with this?
Wow, I think this speaks to the heart of what I'm trying to do because what I'd love to see is for districts and schools to incorporate this kind of development, this kind of core competency development in emotional intelligence in every professional development session, In professional learning communities, you can use my book or you can just use research on your own, but honestly, I have a workbook that would be perfect for professional learning communities because it actually covers all educators. But we've got to start giving educators the tools they need to deal with the demands of the role. I think that's what's missing, and that's not to say that the things we learn through professional development are not crucial and important. They are. It's important to learn best practices. It's important to learn how to write the perfect IEP. All of that is really, really important. But what we're leaving out is how do you sustain yourself with all of the demands of your role? And we're not giving educators any tools for that. And that is leading to the burnout, which is leading to the turnover and the detachment and all the things we talked about. So as far as what they should do, just start including it. Just start including it anywhere that you can and be supportive of it. Some of the schools that are using this type of core competency development are actually, the whole school uses the same language. They support each other with emotional intelligence development. So they're using the same kind of language to describe what they're working on. They provide time for check-ins, things like that. That's probably something that won't happen overnight, but at least just start with, let's get this into the professional development curriculum because what a huge difference it makes, truly.
Well, and I was even thinking about how, because providing the tools for teachers, we aren't doing that. And I was just even thinking about how in professional development, having the different layers of, yes, let's learn about best practices and this new curriculum and support the actual getting the work done piece. But even before that is setting, if you don't have some of those other tools like the self-awareness, the self-regulation, all of those things will be very overwhelming.
Absolutely, Larissa. And that's one of the reasons I'm talking to university, because that's where I would love to see it in professional development, but I would also love to see it in teacher prep programs. Let's go ahead and let them graduate with the skills that they need to manage the demands of the work, because that's the sad part to me. You come out of your teacher prep program and you're so excited and you're so on fire. And then 2 or 3 years in, you're just overwhelmed. You're exhausted. You don't have any tools. Nobody's given you any ways to cope with and stay centered, throughout the demands over those first few years. So I would love to see it incorporated in education so that you're ready for what comes. Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like, I can think about, we teach a lot of these things to students, right? Like, we will coach them on these types of skills
in
classrooms and CL lessons and stuff. And I think that there is that piece of practicing that as adults of like, if we're wanting our students to have these skills too, like practicing. And I even think it's like, if you as a leader are wanting your teachers to do this kind of work, you starting with yourself and maybe your other team of administrators of like, do we have a check-in with ourselves throughout the day?
That's right. Yeah.
Because I do think that, that aspect of if I'm more centered or more calm and feel regulated and feel emotionally well, it's so much easier for me to go into a really busy work day and get all the things done. Like I think about the best years of teaching for me were like, I'm feeling good and I feel like I can tackle these things, even when it's overwhelming. And then the years where I struggled and was feeling burnout, felt like everything felt too much and things are falling through the cracks because I just didn't have the mental and emotional bandwidth for those.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons that the book that I wrote is really for all special educators, and that includes principals, and that includes district leaders, and that includes speech and language. It's the whole gamut. Like you said, you can't really expect to teach this to someone if you're not willing to integrate it into your own way of leading, right? So I think that's really, it's an important point, and I do think that it has to be sort of something that's supported school-wide too. So you can do this individually, absolutely. I mean, I certainly did. A lot of the tools that I used for many, many years, I pretty much did it on my own. But wow, what an amazing culture that could be created if the leaders and everybody involved were focused on developing these skills. Because I didn't mention this, but it's more than just, the research is showing that this is more than just staff retention and things like that. It's also student outcomes increase when these skills are developed. Also, classroom management gets better. Also, parent relationships get better because you're doing things like, once you get into the empathy phase, you're doing perspective taking on a regular basis. There's so many things that this covers that it's the entire culture that becomes affected by it if you have groups of people engaged, if that makes sense. So doing it individually, I absolutely recommend it. I mean, if your school's not doing it, you need it regardless because you've got to get through, right? But in my mind and in my heart, what I would love to see is districts embracing this. It's just part of what they give to teachers because teachers do need it.
Yeah. Well, and I was just even thinking, having the leaders just starting with yourself.
Yes.
And then before, and then
sure,
branching out to your staff. Because I can think about, some of those educators that are juggling multiple roles, right? They're not only the MTSS coordinator, but
oh my gosh,
they have a classroom of reading intervention, and they also serve as the testing coordinator. And just thinking about teachers that fall into all these different roles and how, it can seem like overwhelming to try to tackle this thing. But this is time efficient, right? This is small things that you start.
Yeah, yes. Most of these tools, I mean, less than 10 minutes that you can schedule throughout your day, which is what I love about it, is that it's really something that's absolutely possible to integrate.
You mentioned that idea of how much this can impact student outcome and impact, family relationships. It has so many sort of like down the river impacts, right? Just even thinking in the last 6 years, how much there's been kind of just a survival mode. I feel like there's a lot of educators that are on survival post-pandemic, and schools are trying to get back to normal or whatever normal is, and move and then address like learning loss and gaps in education and outcomes. And then also dealing with teacher burnout and teacher turnover and leader turnover. I think that some of those, even just understanding how like sometimes these small things can have that larger impact if we slow down and really like recognize where can we equip our team, how can we equip our team and be a community that supports each other? Because I do think some of this work can be done, collaboratively.
Yeah, I agree. Professional learning communities, I always love those. And I definitely think this is something that can be incorporated into any professional learning community. If the district's not sort of bought into making it full-on professional development, then let's do it in groups, and that just strengthens, like you said, those connections. I love what it does for a building, because when you're incorporating this kind of work into a building itself, it just, I guess, kids are just so receptive. It really trickles down to the kiddos too. And it's just a domino effect that's kind of almost unbelievable. Everything just starts to feel like, yeah, we're all in this together. We're all here to support each other and grow and learn. And it just becomes it becomes the kind of environment that you kind of, I guess, fantasize about working in because everybody's on the same page as far as, where they are emotionally. And emotional intelligence is not necessarily, people have the wrong idea if they think that you're just not setting boundaries and things like that. Part of emotional intelligence is absolutely setting healthy boundaries. There's a lot of things involved in developing these skills that make sure you maintain your own integrity, but also try to work together, work collaboratively, if that makes sense. And that's pretty powerful. And that's hard to do in most settings.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking, some of it is figuring out how to create safe places and safety, right? Because I think I've talked about this in the podcast
that's right.
before. Part of what we do here at Branching Minds is helping districts implement MTSS and implementing a system and implementing technology and different things like that. And, adoption for those things requires buy-in, and buy-in requires trust, and trust requires safety.
Yes.
and then emotional safety. I can imagine there's educators listening to this going, oh, that sounds great, but I'm not going to tell people that I feel unsafe or I feel anxious.
Yes.
There can be places where you don't feel safe to do that. And, I was just thinking about how, if you have a PLC or you have a team, that trying to build some of that trust and safety is really important to start small in those pockets.
Mm-hmm.
Have a space where you just check in. I remember that one time with a team of people, we all just were like, what are we bringing in today? And some of it's
Love that. Love that. Yeah. Yeah. This pretty much takes that practice to a different level, because I also had that experience. What are we bringing? What kind of attitudes are we bringing in? And so this is an awesome way to collaborate together. But it takes it to a different level, because once you kind of assess where you are, now you can determine if you need to shift, because you can shift your mindset. You can do that. And some of these tools directly focus on shifting that mindset. And you can do it if you know how to leverage your brain and you know which tools to use to sort of shift you into a different mindset. So that's what makes it quite powerful.
Okay. So here's my last question. What do you hope that educators that read this book, educators or leaders that read your book or explore your tools, what do you hope that they walk away with?
I hope they walk away with the understanding that they have some level of control over burnout. That there are things they can do to actually mitigate burnout and then move them toward thriving and excelling in their work. That is really what I hope, that they stop surviving and start thriving, because a lot of educators these days are just trying to endure it, and it's just not a solution. So I hope they walk away from the book. And I also provide a training too, so I have a training for emotional intelligence development. In any of those things, if they walk away realizing that we don't have to endure, we can actually be proactive, we can actually make some choices that will make things better, either individually or as a school. That would be my hope, because I want to see people successfully thriving in what they do. The work is just so important.
Yeah, we know the work is supporting students is really important, and we got to put on our own mask first, right?
That's right. We have to support our people that are supporting our students, and we're not doing that, and that's disappointing. But I think it's starting to change. The more and more research that's out there, the more and more people are trying it. There are schools out in Seattle, some in California. I think there's some, I want to say Colorado, but there more and more of them are starting to integrate this work, and they're just seeing tremendous results.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing your work with us. And I think this is such an important conversation, especially at this time of year.
Yeah.
As teachers are just waiting patiently for spring break, or they're, gearing up to survive that last few months of school year. And so I'm just thankful to have resources like this to share with our audience. So thank you for being here.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Larissa.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Branching Minds.